Introductions. The greatest show on earth. The psychology of money, why smart people do dumb things with their finances. Financial success is not just about how smart you are, but also how you behave. That's the central argument made by author Morgan Housel in his book The Psychology of Money. To illustrate this point, Housel shares the stories of two very different investors. Ronald Reed was a high school graduate who worked modest blue-collar jobs his whole life, like janitor and gas station attendant. Yet when Reed passed away at age 92, he secretly left behind an $8 million fortune, amassed simply through long-term investments in blue-chip stocks. On the other end of the spectrum was Richard Fuscon, a Harvard MBA graduate, who became a highly successful Merrill Lynch finance executive. But Fuscon ultimately went bankrupt after the 2008 crisis due to greedy overspending and high debt levels. The contrast shows that financial outcomes depend more on behavior than intelligence or credentials. Reed was patient and disciplined, Fuscon greedy and overconfident. That behavioral gap overshadowed their educational differences. This is because finance is guided by psychology more than cold hard rules. Money confuses and emotionally affects all of us in individual ways. So making good financial choices requires emotional wisdom and self-awareness, not just math skills. Yet our culture treats finance like physics, as if rigid laws determine outcomes. We're told to save 10% of our salary, and are given investing formulas. But no formulas can predict how greed or fear will affect our decisions when money is on the line. Understanding the psychology behind our financial behavior offers real wisdom. It teaches why people bury themselves in debt, panic during market crashes, and make other seemingly irrational money choices. Mastering our inner psychology leads to better outcomes than memorizing financial rules. Housel wrote this book to share the money lessons he learned observing human behavior during the 2008 financial crisis. He aims to help people become more self-aware about their financial psychology, so they can make wiser money decisions. For finances are ultimately guided by people, not numbers. The roots of our financial behavior. The passage provides insightful perspective on why people make the financial decisions they do. At the core is the fact that our personal experiences shape our financial beliefs and behaviors far more than pure logic or facts. To illustrate this, the passage contrasts the wildly divergent money experiences of different generations and demographics. Those who lived through high inflation have a vastly different view of bonds than those who have only known low inflation. Groups with different socioeconomic backgrounds form views about concepts like risk and savings rates based on their own lived experience, not spreadsheets. The passage also notes how new many pillars of modern finance are. Retirement investing, college savings plans, index funds, these are all recent creations still working out major kinks. With little generational knowledge to draw on, suboptimal financial decisions are inevitable as we figure things out in real time. How then should we approach others' financial choices? With empathy, seeking first to understand the roots of their views. Just as our own behaviors make sense given our histories, so too for others. The passage reminds us to withhold quick judgment of choices that look odd or extreme through our own lens. Behind every financial decision lies a web of influential life experiences. This perspective can guide personal growth as well. In questioning our own money behaviors, we should examine the formative experiences that anchored them, not just whether they are logically airtight. With self-awareness of what shaped our financial mental models, we can broaden perspective and consider new approaches optimized for the future, not the past. The passage highlights a key truth: our financial behaviors evolve from lived experience more than anything else. Keeping this at the fore can lead to better understanding of ourselves and others when money is involved. The hidden forces behind our financial outcomes. The passage provides thought-provoking perspective on how much of our financial successes and failures are actually driven by luck and risk rather than individual decisions. It cautions against over-attributing outcomes to personal effort, as extreme examples of wealth or poverty often have influencing factors well outside one's control. The passage gives several vivid examples, like Bill Gates' one-in-a-million fortune of attending a rare school with computer access that proved formative to Microsoft's origins. Or his equally skilled friend Kent, who was killed in a freak mountaineering accident before realizing his potential. Luck and risk, heads and tails of the same coin. This is not to dismiss effort and good judgment. But we rarely account for how minute circumstances outside our control can play decisive roles for better or worse. The passage calls for more humility in assessing financial outcomes, both our own and others. Just as we should not completely credit Gates' success to sheer brilliance, nor should we call those less fortunate lazy. Outcomes have complex roots. This also makes learning from financial successes and failures complicated. We are quick to lionize the billionaire who broke rules or condemn failure as poor decisions. But prudent risk versus reckless luck is a fine line only visible in hindsight. The passage advises studying broad patterns rather than extreme individual cases that tend to have inflated randomness. In closing, the passage reminds us failure can obscure risk just as success breeds overconfidence in luck. Neither is quite what it seems. Maintaining this balanced perspective allows both for accountability and forgiveness when financial expectations go unmet. And arranging affairs to withstand failure gives space for the odds to eventually work in our favor. The elusive concept of enough. What is enough when it comes to money and success? That profound question lies at the heart of the excerpt from Morgan Housel's book The Psychology of Money. The stories of Rajat Gupta and Bernie Madoff illustrate how two incredibly successful and wealthy men were not content with what they had and destroyed their lives and reputations in the relentless pursuit of more. Housel argues that modern capitalism fuels envy and pushes people to constantly reach for the next rung of the status ladder. Social comparison traps us in an endless battle that cannot be won. There will always be someone who has more, much more. Even multimillionaires and billionaires gaze upwards at those with greater fortunes. The key, Housel says, is to realize that enough is not too little. It does not mean settling for less or leaving opportunities on the table. Rather, it is realizing that the ceaseless hunger for more will only push you to regret. Knowing when to stop taking risks is invaluable for preserving your reputation, freedom, family, friends, and happiness. While social comparison is unavoidable today, the only way to win is to exit the game entirely and define enough for yourself. This means halting the endless upwards creep of expectations and desires. Happiness lies in results minus expectations. If expectations continually inflate, you will never feel content, no matter your level of success. The tool for building enough is simple, Housel says, though undoubtedly challenging for many. It does not require risky trade-offs that could damage the invaluable intangibles in life. Finding contentment and fulfillment at some point along the path to material success may provide the only sustainable way forward for individuals and society alike. The power of compounding, lessons from ice ages. Morgan Housel's comparison of ice ages and compound interest in investing may seem odd, but it contains an important lesson. You don't need a huge force to drive tremendous results if the underlying process compounds. Just as moderately cool summers, not frigid winters, set off a self-reinforcing cycle of snow and ice accumulation leading to an ice age over centuries, so too can small amounts of money, invested early with consistent returns over decades, compound into an enormous sum thanks to the exponential growth curve. Housel argues most people underestimate the power of compounding because linear thinking comes more naturally. We look to earn the highest investment returns in the shortest period of time to get rich quick. But the greatest fortunes tend to come from pretty good returns that you can stick with and which can be repeated for the longest period of time. Time for compounding to work its magic is the key. Warren Buffett is case in point. His skill is investing, but his secret weapon is time. $84 billion of his $84.5 billion net worth was earned after his 50th birthday. Had he started investing later in life and retired earlier, his fortune would have been a fraction of its size. Meanwhile, hedge fund manager James Simons has earned an astounding 66% annual investment returns since 1988, nearly triple that of Buffett. Yet Buffett is far richer, because he has compounded for 70+ years compared to around 40 years for Simons. Compounding remains a wildly counterintuitive force. In sum, when seeking to solve the problem of building wealth, we often overlook the simplest but most powerful tools, the exponential growth curve over long time horizons. Our linear thinking blinds us. The lessons from the accumulated snow and ice sheets of the ice ages serve as apt reminder. The skill of staying wealthy. Getting rich and staying rich require two distinct skill sets that rarely occur in the same person, as illustrated by the contrasting stories of Jesse Livermore and Abraham Germansky. Livermore made a fortune shorting stocks during the 1929 market crash while Germansky lost everything. Yet just a few years later, Livermore had lost his entire fortune and committed suicide. These stories reveal a profound insight. Survival is the critical factor for long-term wealth creation, not clever investments or even business success. As the old saying goes, the only way to stay wealthy is through some combination of frugality and paranoia. The math of compounding favors survival. Compounding investment returns only work their magic over long periods of time. Even modest returns can grow fortunes given decades to accumulate. But realizing these outsized returns means surviving the booms and busts of markets and avoiding forced selling at inopportune times. Warren Buffett's partner Rick Guerin provides a cautionary example. Despite matching Buffett's skill, Guerin used too much leverage and got wiped out during a bear market, forfeiting decades of potential gains. Avoiding ruin lets compounding do its work. Cultivating a survival mentality. Optimism fuels risk-taking and wealth creation, but unbridled optimism contains the seeds of its own destruction. The survival mindset balances optimism with a healthy paranoia, embracing contradictions. It plans for adversity while hoping for the best. Margin of safety provides wiggle room for when plans go awry. Conservative spending, reasonable leverage, and flexibility are invisible portfolio assets. Room for error increases the odds of getting to the future unencumbered by past mistakes. The survival mindset accepts short-term destruction on the way to long-term progress. Market crashes, recessions and business failures are not anomalies but regular aspects of a growing economy. Periods of pessimism are inevitable, despite improving standards of living over time. In conclusion, survival may not be glamorous, but it allows compounding to work its magic. The ability to avoid wipeouts is the hidden skill of the world's great investors. Cultivating this underappreciated mental muscle can make the difference between dying rich and dying broke. The role of tail events in determining success. Many exceptionally successful people, companies, and investment funds owe the bulk of their results to a small number of outsized winners rather than steady incremental progress. These tail events, the rare, extreme outcomes at the edges of a distribution, exert a powerful, disproportionate influence due to their sheer magnitude. Understanding how tails drive finance and investing provides a critical perspective. Outliers spawn the megatech companies that drive market returns and the venture funds that back them. Master art dealers buy thousands of pieces knowing a few will end up priceless. Tail insights help explain how index funds reliably beat most stock pickers over time despite inferior skills. surviving the bad to enable the good. Tails cut both ways. Just as a few winners determine success, a few mistakes can determine failure. High-profile bankruptcies and investment blow-ups litter the business landscape. Forgotten are the hundreds of bad ideas and failed products behind every breakthrough. Rather than fight this randomness, the survival mindset accepts adversity as the price of progress. Great investors lose money on most picks but make it back on a handful. Visionary CEOs preside over failed projects without blinking. Understanding the normality of tails enables risk-taking without recklessness. Tuning out the noise. The outsized attention paid to outliers leaves us anchored to the average. When faced with tales of overnight billions and soaring stocks, our own incremental progress feels inadequate by comparison. This distortion fuels a destructive jealousy. The antidote is recognizing the universality of failure and ruin on the way to success. We wrongly assume the masters were right all along, ignoring the graveyard of past mistakes hidden beneath the sheen of achievement. We fail to embed our own setbacks in this context, losing perspective in moments of doubt. In closing, tales create a paradox. They represent extreme good luck yet also reward skill in pursuing odds-defying outcomes. Those able to repeat tail success have often survived many more failures than ever known. Progress depends on an acceptance that adversity accompanies achievement, destruction enables growth, and humility drives outsized long-term returns. Money's highest dividend, the ability to control your time. While the pursuit of money often stems from a desire for happiness, several studies find little correlation between wealth and well-being. Instead, the highest dividend money pays is the ability to control your schedule and activities. Time affords freedom. Financial assets allow us to wake up each day able to do whatever we want, whether that means taking a vacation, switching careers, or merely working flexible hours. This flexibility provides a buffer against the demands of bosses, creditors, illness and other unexpected chaos. As the old saying goes, time is money. But the inverse is also true, money is time. Accumulating unspent wealth in the form of investments or cash savings creates optionality in how we spend our days. Further, aligning finances towards maximizing control over our time leads to greater life satisfaction. The all-consuming modern job. Despite being wealthier overall, Americans today report no higher happiness than in the 1950s. This is partly explained by a lack of control over our time compared to the past. Knowledge and service roles that rely on mental output rather than physical tasks dominate today's economy. With work tethered to laptops and smartphones rather than assembly lines, many employees feel chained to their jobs around the clock. In contrast, earlier factory workers detached completely outside work hours. Our always-on economy and brain-centric jobs lead to a sense of never escaping professional demands. Money's true purpose. The elderly consistently report that happiness springs from quality relationships, membership in a community, and unstructured time with family, not working relentlessly to afford material luxuries. Money should serve to expand our autonomy over how we spend our hours and days rather than imprison us in a gilded cage. In closing, money's worth lies in the control of time it enables, not the stuff it can buy. Structuring financial choices to maximize freedom over our schedule is the path to lasting contentment. Time affords the space to nurture what and who we truly value rather than serve what we're told to value. The true wealth, how money can buy happiness through time and control. The excerpt argues that the highest form of wealth is not money itself, but the control over one's time and life that money enables. It contends that while Americans today are wealthier financially than previous generations, we are not necessarily happier. A major reason for this is that while our incomes have risen, our sense of control over our time has diminished. More of us have knowledge-based or managerial jobs where work never truly ends. Unlike industrial jobs of the past, today's brain work means we are constantly on the clock even outside working hours thanks to smartphones and computers. So it feels like we're working 24/7. The author cites research showing that having control over how one spends their time is one of the strongest predictors of happiness and well-being. The elderly Americans interviewed prioritized things like time with friends and family, not earning power or wealth accumulation. Kids care more about time with parents than expensive presents. So the best way to leverage greater wealth is to buy back control of your schedule. This could mean things like the ability to take time off work when sick or after a layoff without going broke, retiring when you want to rather than when disability forces it, or working flexible hours that better suit your lifestyle. Using money to reduce financial fragility leads to a greater sense of independence and autonomy. The author argues we should acknowledge that humans crave control over their lives, which money can provide. But satisfaction won't necessarily come from just making more money to buy more expensive things in an endless cycle. True wealth resides in using money to craft a schedule and lifestyle aligned with what makes you happy, things like time, affluence, and deep relationships. Our incomes have risen substantially, but our happiness has not kept pace because we have relinquished control over our schedules. Using money to take back that control could be the path to finding wealth's greatest intrinsic value. The empty promises of wealth signaling. The excerpt examines the common but mistaken belief that flashy displays of wealth, like luxury cars, large homes, and expensive jewelry, will earn one admiration and respect from others. The author argues this belief is misguided, as people tend to admire the possessions themselves rather than the owner. The article draws on the author's experience working as a hotel valet where he parked extravagant sports cars for guests. He dreamed of having an exotic car himself one day, assuming it would make him look successful and important in the eyes of others, sending a signal about his status. But in observing reactions to the nice cars, the author realized people were impressed by the cars themselves, not the drivers. The car triggered a sense of envy in onlookers, making them wish they had such nice vehicles, so others would admire them in the same way. The focus stayed on the car, rarely extending respect or admiration to its owner sitting in the driver's seat. Essentially, people aspire toward flashy wealth displays because they believe it will make others view them as prominent, smart, and cultured. But the reality is that observers simply experience car/house/jewelry envy rather than sincere respect for the owner. The possessions become benchmarks for what others wish they had in order to be admired. This reveals an irony about wealth signaling via luxury goods. People want nice things because they believe it will make others think highly of them. But in fact others are too focused on fantasizing about having those nice things for themselves to pay much genuine admiration toward the owners. The author concludes that while there's nothing inherently wrong with pursuing wealth and some luxury goods, those who want true, sincere respect from others should focus on cultivating things like humility, kindness, and empathy. As opposites of hubris and conceit, these traits are more likely to earn genuine admiration than any sports car or mansion ever could. The invisible nature of true wealth. The excerpt makes a critical distinction between being rich and being wealthy. Richness is defined by current income that funds a lavish, materialistic lifestyle full of flashy cars, clothes, vacations, etc. But true wealth is far more invisible, residing in assets that haven't yet been converted into extravagant visible possessions. Wealth is financial flexibility, savings, unspent income. In essence, it's money you don't see. The author recounts working as a hotel valet where he'd park ostentatious sports cars for guests. It was easy to assume these people with $100,000 vehicles were wealthy. But in getting to know some owners, he found they were merely rich, spending an outsized chunk of income to appear rich via a luxury car. Their vehicle gave the illusion of underlying wealth that wasn't necessarily there. This speaks to a broader point. In modern life, full of Instagram displays and status symbols, people constantly conflate being rich with being wealthy. They believe wealth is owning expensive things. So they make purchases to signal a wealth they don't actually have, keeping little in leftover savings or assets. Rihanna's near bankruptcy despite income highlights this tendency. But wealth is best embodied by those who don't spend. It's the nice cars not purchased, the vacations not taken, the apparel foregone. Unspent income earns options and flexibility down the road. It takes self-control and rejecting instant gratification, like losing weight through diet and exercise rather than eating more calories. Getting rich allows current consumption, getting wealthy enables future consumption. This invisible nature of wealth makes it harder to learn and model financial success for one's self. We see private jet photos from celebrities but not their mundane brokerage accounts slowly accumulating through patient investing. The thriftiness of a secret millionaire like Ronald Read was only appreciated widely after he died, not before. When success is showy, it captures attention and imitation. When it's subtle, it doesn't. In the end, what counts as wise financial behavior depends on one's goals. But the author notes it's important to be cognizant of the difference between chasing visible richness today versus building invisible wealth for tomorrow. Splurging on toys for status tends to eventually catch up with your actual economic realities. But restraint and moderation can pay compounding dividends over decades. Discerning between the two is vital for making informed money decisions. The underestimated power of savings. The excerpt makes an impassioned case for why everyone should be saving money, not just those aiming to buy a house or retire someday. It argues that savings earns extraordinary yet underestimated returns by providing flexibility, resilience, and control over one's time. This theme is introduced through an analogy to the 1970s energy crisis. Experts warned we'd run out of oil given growing demand and capped supply. Yet we overcame shortages not by discovering more oil, but through improving efficiency, using less energy to power economic output. Conservation proved more powerful than new extraction. The author argues this same principle applies to personal finance. We focus immense effort on finding high-return investments when it's savings and frugality within our control that builds wealth. Asset returns rely on volatile markets and luck. Savings rates rely on our own behavior. Like energy efficiency, financial efficiency compounds. Moreover, savings provide flexibility and options no market return can match. Having a safety net enables pursuing more meaningful work with less pay, waiting for ripe opportunities, and weathering surprises. Unspent savings create a gap between what you can do and what you choose to do that accrues value over time. It grants control over your schedule that is key for happiness. The author contends part of why more don't save is an obsession with rational goals like a new car. But saving for its own sake builds resilience and freedom to pivot. He argues market competition now spans the global talent pool, making advantages like intelligence less differentiating. Flexibility and financial cushioning become key as routine skills face automation. In the end, saving money may provide extraordinary returns in the form of flexibility and control over one's time that are real but unmeasurable. Much like the 1970s experts overlooked efficiency's power, we overlook savings' power in building wealth people need. Creating wiggle room and options for yourself earns compounding dividends in a world where advantages lie in soft skills like adapting to change. Just ask someone who loses a job in a recession. In finance as in energy, conservation and efficiency warrant more attention as pillars of abundance. The unreasonable effectiveness of being reasonable with money. Many of us strive to make purely rational decisions with our finances. We seek the mathematically optimal investment strategy, aiming to maximize returns while minimizing risk. However, as the provided passages argue, this emotionless approach often fails in practice. Instead, we should focus on being reasonably satisfied with our financial choices rather than perfectly rational. The first passage tells the story of Julius Wagner Jureg, a doctor who pioneered an unorthodox fever therapy to treat syphilis in the 1900s. Although science now shows fevers help fight infection, we universally fear and suppress them because they cause discomfort. This reveals an important truth: people base decisions not on cold logic but on reasonable tolerance of pain or other negatives. Similarly, the second passage advises applying a good enough mindset to personal finance instead of seeking theoretical perfection. Harry Markowitz, pioneer of modern portfolio theory, constructed an initial 50-50 stock/bond portfolio based on minimizing future regret rather than mathematical optimization. While not fully rational, this splitting of differences was a reasonable compromise between risk and return. The Yale study proposing aggressive leveraged investing for retirement may be mathematically sound, but laughably ignores real human behavior. No one could stay committed after losing their entire savings, rendering the strategy wholly unreasonable. Thus, something can be technically true yet contextually nonsense in money matters. In fact, lacking emotions about investments increases the odds you'll abandon them during hard times. But passion for a company's mission or product can provide necessary motivation to persevere. So contrary to the archetype of the coldly rational investor, you should try to love what you own. That emotional durability quantifiably boosts your chances of long-term success in the market. Home country bias in investing is technically irrational yet reasonable because familiarity lends the faith to back strangers. Individual stock picking likely won't beat indexes but satisfies a human desire for adventure. Most market forecasts fail but offer needed psychological direction. And Jack Bogle made index funds his life's work while still investing a bit with his active manager son, because family reasons can override philosophical consistency. In all these examples, the technically imperfect but emotionally satisfying path prevailed over textbook rationality. Perhaps we should judge financial decisions not by their optimality in a vacuum, but by their reasonableness for real human beings, in full context of our complex behavioral wiring. Aiming for contentedness rather than perfection may empower surprisingly effective money moves. The limits of using history to predict the future of finance. Investors and economists often rely heavily on historical data and patterns to forecast the future. But the world of finance is constantly evolving in unpredictable ways due to human behavior, structural changes, and black swan events. As the passage argues, historians are not prophets when it comes to money and markets. The role of surprises. Many of history's most transformative events in finance were black swans, utterly unpredictable and unprecedented. Events like the Great Depression, the dot-com bubble, 9/11, the 2008 crisis, and the COVID pandemic have had massive ripple effects on global markets and economies in ways no one could have reasonably foretold. As Nassim Taleb writes, we fail to imagine that the worst past event was itself a surprise with no precedent. Rather than using past crises to set future risk parameters, we should humbly admit the world remains full of surprises. Changing structures. The very structure of finance has radically transformed over decades and centuries. The advent of things like 401ks, IRA accounts, venture capital, automated trading, electronic markets, and new regulations have fundamentally changed investing in ways that render much historical data obsolete. As Benjamin Graham admitted late in life, formulas that once may have generated good returns can lose their edge as more investors discover and then distort their effectiveness. The dangers of iron laws. In finance, the dismissive refrain is often "this time is different." But change does occur. As John Templeton noted, things prove legitimately different around 20% of the time. When backtesting models or consulting history books, investors should focus more on broad principles of human social behavior rather than seeking ironclad historical laws. The economy evolves in real time, and the best guide to the near future is often more recent events rather than distant history. In conclusion, investors and economists should cultivate a historical awareness without over-reliance on past data for precision forecasts. Markets are complex adaptive systems, not mechanical formulaic engines. As Sagan warns, things that have never happened before happen all the time in finance. Surprises, black swans and unpredictability are the rule, not the exception. The power of room for error, why you need margin of safety in personal finance. In volatile and uncertain environments like personal finance, having room for error through margin of safety is one of the most powerful tools for enduring storms and seizing opportunities. As the text illustrates through examples like card counting in blackjack, margin of safety means building in buffers that allow you to withstand adversity and stick around long enough to let the odds fall in your favor over time. 3 key reasons why room for error matters in personal finance. 1. It protects you when your forecasts and predictions inevitably prove inaccurate. As Benjamin Graham wisely noted, margin of safety renders the forecast unnecessary. No financial plan survives completely intact. 2. It prevents you from taking risks that could lead to total ruin or wipe you out of the game, like overleverage. Optimism bias causes us to focus on favorable odds and ignore small ruin risks. But ruin risks matter enormously. Room for error lets you take risks while avoiding wipeout events. 3. It gives you capacity to handle unpredictable black swan events, like the tank unit defeated by field mice. The biggest single point of failure in personal finance is having no savings buffer for surprise expenses. But room for error lets you endure crises and still take advantage of opportunities that arise in their aftermath. In your own financial plan, it's wise to build in margin of safety wherever possible, whether in conservative return assumptions, higher savings rates, or cash buffers. The flexibility this provides will prove invaluable in navigating the unpredictable financial environment most of us face over a lifetime. Events rarely go precisely according to plan. Buffering for error is what makes long-term success possible. The inevitability of changing financial goals over a lifetime. Few of us accurately predict how much our personalities, desires, and goals will change over the course of our lives. This end-of-history illusion makes long-term financial planning difficult. What we want out of life at age 20 or 30 is often very different from what we want at age 50 or 70. The author shares an example of a friend who dreamed for years of becoming a doctor, overcoming steep odds to achieve this goal. But after finally reaching this coveted career, the stresses and hours wore him down. He seemed as disappointed with where he ended up as he once was driven toward that goal years earlier. This pattern plays out across careers and personal choices. Only 27% of college graduates end up in jobs related to their major. 29% of stay-at-home parents have college degrees, suggesting they once had different plans. From dreams of driving tractors to chasing lucrative legal careers and then shifting priorities after having children, our evolving preferences make it hard to stick to financial plans. The end-of-history illusion causes us to underestimate this future change. We focus on how much we feel we've evolved compared to our younger selves, while failing to recognize our future selves may view us today with similar disbelief at our misguided priorities and plans. What principles can help navigate this reality of shifting financial goals? The author suggests 2 guidelines. 1. Avoid extreme plans. Whether pursuing austerity or luxury lifestyles as young adults, assuming our contentment with these extremes will persist for decades is often proven wrong. Moderate approaches across savings, spending, work hours, etc. allow more flexibility as goals change. 2. Accept the inevitability of change. Clinging to past decisions out of pride rarely leads to fulfillment. View choices as the best plans for who you were at the time, not eternal covenants. When goals shift, be willing to detonate previous efforts and move ahead with no sunk costs, rather than drag out outdated priorities. Embracing the reality that our future selves may view us today with disbelief allows financial planning to become not a static rulebook, but a flexible path to align resources with our evolving needs over a long lifetime. The high price of investment success. Investing returns often look straightforward on paper. Put your money in the stock market for the long run, let compounding work its magic, and enjoy a comfortable retirement. If only it was so easy. As former GE CEO Jeff Immelt remarked, every job looks easy when you're not the one doing it. The reality is that high investment returns demand a high price that many investors fail to adequately appreciate or prepare for psychologically. This price is not denominated in dollars and cents but rather volatility, uncertainty, doubt, and regret. Study after study shows the average equity mutual fund investor dramatically underperforms the very funds they invest in due to poor market timing decisions. They buy high after a run-up and sell low during panics and crashes. Why this destructive behavior? Because volatility feels less like a fee you pay to earn higher returns and more like a fine for making poor decisions. The natural impulse is to avoid fines, and thus investors take actions that backfire. Legendary former GE CEO Jack Welch became famous for smoothing earnings, so that investors would not have to endure surprises and volatility quarter to quarter. But this artifice led to a day of reckoning where all the deferred volatility had to eventually rear its ugly head, crushing GE's stock price for over a decade. Mortgage giants Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac played similar games in the early 2000s, only to collapse into insolvency during the financial crisis. So how can investors condition themselves to willingly pay the price for equity outperformance? By reframing volatility as an admission fee rather than a fine. The $100 you pay for Disneyland tickets gives your family lasting memories despite the odd rainy day. The $10 county fair might have guaranteed good weather but offers less upside. Similarly, cash and bonds spare you short-term uncertainty but likely hamper your long-term returns. Ground yourself in the rationale for equity investing and remember that markets bouncing around is the price you must pay for that rationale to bear fruit. Pay the volatility fee, and with any luck, the result will be worth far more than the price. The boom and bust of financial bubbles, why they form and how they wreck lives. Financial bubbles, from the dot-com bubble of the 1990s to the housing bubble of the 2000s, have become an unfortunately common occurrence in modern economies. These speculative manias inevitably end in disaster, wiping out trillions in household wealth and leaving economic devastation in their wake. But what causes these periodic bouts of irrational optimism, and sky-high asset valuations? According to the passage, while greed is often blamed, the true reasons are more complex, rooted in human psychology and misaligned incentives between different types of investors. Specifically, bubbles form when short-term traders playing a momentum game start dominating the market. As asset prices get bid up higher and higher over weeks or months, these short-term speculators are lured in by the prospect of quick and easy profits. Their influx then pushes prices even higher in a self-reinforcing spiral, detaching prices from any reasonable long-term valuation metrics. Long-term investors get sucked in as well, fooled into thinking maybe these traders know something I don't. They abandon their focus on discounted cash flows and growth projections 30 years out. Instead they start chasing short-term price action just like the speculators. Of course, no bubble can inflate forever. Eventually the mania ends, the speculators rush for the exits, and prices collapse. But by this point, enormous economic damage has already been done. Nest eggs intended for retirement or college savings are wiped out. The economy tips into recession as household balance sheets repair. Foreclosures and bankruptcies soar. And yet, we never seem to learn. Just a decade separated the dot-com and housing bubbles. More bubbles will continue to emerge unless long-term investors wise up. The key is understanding your own goals and time horizon, tuning out short-term market moves irrelevant to your strategy, and refusing to be swayed into playing a very different game than you set out to. The psychology of bubbles may be complicated, but individuals can take common-sense steps to insulate themselves. Write an investing mission statement. Focus on value, not momentum. Take the long view. Do that, and you'll be far less likely to get sucked into the next mania. The allure of pessimism: why doom and gloom captivate while optimism is overlooked. Pessimism holds a special place in our hearts. As the provided excerpts point out, pessimism is not just more common than optimism, it often sounds smarter, more plausible, more intellectual, and more realistic. Prophets of doom captivate attention and admiration, while optimists are frequently written off as naive, oblivious to risks, or downright embarrassingly mad, as author Matt Ridley puts it. But why does pessimism have such strong allure and staying power? As explored in the excerpts, there are several key reasons. 1. Loss aversion is evolutionarily ingrained. As psychologist Daniel Kahneman explains, organisms that treat threats as urgent have better survival odds. This instinctual asymmetry between negative and positive makes us latch onto risks and threats. 2. Money's ubiquity means financial threats affect everyone. If the economy catches a cold, we all sneeze. Stocks crashing make headlines even for non-investors. There's no avoiding systemic financial risks. 3. Pessimists often extrapolate trends without accounting for adaptation. As in Lester Brown's ominous 2008 prediction about oil, straight-line extrapolations fail to account for market dynamics and human ingenuity under pressure. Necessity drives invention. 4. Progress happens slowly while setbacks are sudden. The decades-long miracle of modern medicine saves countless lives but goes unappreciated, while singular disasters captivate attention. Compounding growth takes patience, fear springs from hair-trigger events. 5. Lower expectations feel better. By expecting the worst, even moderately good outcomes feel like a bonus, as Stephen Hawking relates regarding his disease. Pessimism lets you be pleasantly surprised. In sum, doom and gloom is intellectually seductive while optimism requires more nuance and long-view historical perspective. Moreover, loss aversion makes us fixate on risks. However, being aware of these biases is the first step toward balance. As the excerpts argue, smart possibilistic optimism grounded in realism remains, for most, the most productive mindset. This draft article summarizes the key points about the allure of pessimism using supporting examples from the provided materials. Please let me know if you would like me to modify or expand the piece in any way. I'm happy to refine it further as needed. The power of financial narratives. The economy experienced a shocking downfall between 2007 and 2009. An outside observer circling above and taking in the tangible signs, the cities, factories, patents, and technologies, would have barely noticed a change. Yet the net worth of U.S. households plunged by $16 trillion. Why? Because the stories people told themselves changed. Narratives, the explanations we craft to make sense of complex systems, are a potent force shaping financial decisions and markets. 3 key insights around narratives stand out. 1. When the stakes are high and solutions limited, people readily believe appealing fictions. This drives bubbles and adherence to financial quackery. History shows that in desperate times, people will believe anything, whether it's medieval bloodletting or today's active fund managers. The tendency persists because the big rewards, however improbable, are so alluring. 2. Everyone has an incomplete view of the world's complexity. We paper over holes in our understanding with internally coherent narratives. Even authorities like the Federal Reserve or professional historians struggle with gaping blind spots. And money, dependent on the unknowable actions of millions, is enormously complex. Market forecasts and financial advisors gain traction not through accuracy but by satisfying our craving for an illusion of predictability and control. 3. The strength of a narrative depends less on truth than on how badly people wish it to be true. The happier a belief would make us, the flimsier the evidence we demand. This shows in booms where new technologies or policies inspire tales of unlimited prosperity. Believing makes it so, at least for a time. Similarly, doomsayers tend to be those who stand to profit or have an emotional stake in Armageddon. With trillions riding on prevailing narratives, financial storytelling warrants skepticism and moderation. Beware assumptions and extremes. Anchor to evidence and room for error. Above all, recognize that money's complexity exceeds anyone's comprehension. Neat and sweeping narratives are almost always too good to be true. The prudent admit how little they know. The dangers of financial advice, lessons from medicine. The tragic case of Clarence Hughes reveals an important lesson about financial advice. In 1931, Hughes went to the dentist for a painful mouth, only to wake up hours later missing 16 teeth and his tonsils, then dying a week later. His wife sued not because the surgery was botched, but because Hughes never consented to such extreme procedures. At the time, consent between doctor and patient was hazy. The prevailing medical wisdom was that doctors know best how to cure the patient. As the article argues, this paternalistic view of medicine parallels how financial advisors often view their role. They believe they know the universal right approach to managing money. But finance, like medicine, is complex and personal. What works for one patient or investor may not work for another, even in identical situations. Values, priorities and risk tolerance vary too widely. This is why the article wisely refrains from directing the reader on what to do with their money. Instead, it offers broad guiding principles, while acknowledging money decisions depend greatly on personal preferences, and emotions like the ability to sleep at night. As Katz wrote about medicine, interactions between advisor and client are complex. Still, advisors provide useful knowledge on odds, risks and typical outcomes. Patients and investors can draw informed conclusions from this input to make decisions aligned with their own desires and temperament. The article sums this up nicely: there are universal truths in money, even if people come to different conclusions about how they want to apply those truths to their own finances. With that context established, the article shares insightful money maxims like saving being the gap between ego and income, increasing your time horizon as an investor, and defining the personal cost you're willing to pay for financial success. It advocates balancing risk-taking with ruin avoidance, respecting different views on money, and always leaving room for error. The piece ends by encouraging the reader to focus less on specific advice, and more on overarching money principles and self-knowledge of preferences and emotions around finances. There are few definitive rights and wrongs, only trade-offs and gray areas. In money and medicine alike, decisions depend enormously on personal factors alongside generic guidance. The article effectively spotlights this nuance while offering many wise finance suggestions open to interpretation by each reader, and their own distinct money personality. The psychology of financial independence, why we save and invest the way we do. Many people wonder why others make certain financial decisions that may seem irrational on the surface. But when it comes to personal finance, there is often a deeper psychology and reasoning behind our choices. In the provided text, author Morgan Housel shares insights into his family's approach to money and the guiding financial principles they live by. At the core is a desire for independence, and the freedom to live life on their own terms. Housel traces this back to watching his parents struggle in poverty and later achieve a measure of financial security. This instilled in him the idea that independence comes not from riches but from living below your means and maintaining a high savings rate. He and his wife have kept their lifestyle static despite rising incomes in order to maximize savings. They own their home outright and keep more cash reserves than advisable, both emotionally driven decisions that sacrifice potential returns for peace of mind. When it comes to investing, Housel has evolved from stock picking to simple, low-cost index funds. He realizes outperforming the market is difficult and, given his family's frugal expenses, unnecessary to meet their goals. Their investing strategy now revolves around optimism in long-term economic growth, patience, and consistency. At the core, the Housels have defined financial success on their own terms, not society's. They optimize decisions to maximize independence, simplicity, and good sleep at night. As Housel notes, no one is crazy when it comes to money and different strategies work for different people. But understanding the psychology behind these choices helps explain why smart people can rationally come to far different conclusions. The Housels' approach may not be right for everyone. But it demonstrates the very personal nature of money and the merit in finding a strategy aligned with your own values, priorities and risk tolerance, not just mathematically optimal returns. Their journey highlights the benefits of financial independence as well as the human factors underpinning all investment and savings decisions. The evolution of the American consumer, how expectations lag behind economic reality. The passage provides a sweeping overview of the major economic events in America over the past 75 years and how they have shaped the psychology of the modern consumer. It argues that consumers today have expectations rooted in the prosperous, egalitarian economy of the 1950s and 60s, even though economic realities have diverged sharply from that period. Bridging the gap between expectations and reality drives much of the discontent and desire for radical change seen in recent political movements. The rise of middle-class America. In the 25 years following World War II, America experienced unprecedented economic growth that was widely shared across income levels. Pent-up consumer demand was unleashed, fueled by easy credit, low interest rates, and rising wages for the middle class. Importantly, this era saw the income gains of the poor rise nearly as fast as the rich. The result was a strong, secure middle class with relatively egalitarian lifestyles. Debt levels climbed but incomes rose in tandem, keeping household debt manageable. The slow rise of inequality. Starting in the 1970s, economic growth continued but became more concentrated among the top income tiers. Middle-class income growth slowed. Americans still held on to expectations of rising living standards from the post-war boom, but reality diverged as inequality widened. To sustain consumption increases, middle-class Americans turned to ever-rising levels of debt. The growing chasm. In recent decades, incomes for the top 1% have skyrocketed while middle-class incomes have stagnated. However, post-war expectations of egalitarian lifestyles continue, driven by media depictions of luxury and wealthy lifestyles. This fuels middle-class families to take on unsustainable debt burdens to finance inflated lifestyle expectations. The Great Recession provided relief on debt levels but did little to reverse inequality trends. The backlash of unmet expectations. Various political movements like the Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street can be seen as a backlash to the growing gap between middle-class expectations of prosperity and the economic realities people actually face. With expectations slow to evolve, anger and desire for radical change may persist even if incomes recover somewhat for the middle class. There are parallels to the unrest of past eras when expectations collided with harsh realities. Bridging this expectation gap is critical for social cohesion and economic stability. Educational efforts are needed, but likely insufficient alone given psychological attachment to expectations. We likely need policies explicitly aimed at reversing inequality as well as cultural change led by business and media.